Hey everybody, my name's LT and this is the Ugly Truck, a 2000 Chevy Silverado 1500. I picked it up a few weeks back and it had a blown transmission in it, so I've already yanked it out. Today I'm going to be working on getting the new one back in and hopefully get this truck one step closer to driving down the road again. Let's get to it. Like most full-size GM trucks of the era, the Ugly Truck came with a 4L60E 4-speed automatic transmission, and they're actually a fairly reliable unit under most circumstances. This one, I believe, has a failed band on the inside. It kind of sits right up here and it applies a drum whenever you're shifting into second and fourth gear. I believe it's cracked because basically it stayed in first gear all the way up until third and there was no overdrive. So the transmission has to come out to be able to access the band and repair it. Now I could have just put a new band in it and been on my way, but this transmission has well over 300,000 miles on it if it's the original one. I don't know if it has been replaced or not. So I didn't really have a warm fuzzy feeling about just slapping a new band in and putting it back in the truck because it's a fair amount of work. On top of that, well, I'm going to be putting down a little bit more horsepower than the 5.3 currently makes. So I didn't really want to waste my time on a rebuild. Now I know you can beef these 4L60s up with some better internal parts and make them hold a little bit more horsepower. And that'd be one thing if I had a lightweight F-body or maybe an LS swap in like an RX-7, but this isn't a fairly heavy truck. So even though you put some good parts in them, they typically don't hold up all that great. But GM did make another transmission right alongside the 4L60 that will be a better alternative. In GM transmission language, the first digit, the 4, stands for how many forward speeds the transmission has. The second digit, in my case L, means longitudinal or basically a rear-wheel drive application. The third and fourth digits, in this case 60, is a relative rating of the strength of the transmission. And the last digit, E, that just means it's electronically controlled. Now, I have no problem with the 4, the L, or the E. It's just the middle digits of 60 that aren't going to work out for my particular application. I need something that's a little bit stronger. So I did a little bit of looking and I came up with this, a 4L80E. Now it was used alongside the 4L60 for many years starting in the early 90s, and basically it was used with anything that had a higher gross vehicle weight rating. It could be a 3/4 ton truck, a motorhome, a step van, basically anything. If it had a big block or a diesel, same thing, it got the 4L80. Now these are pretty good transmission and they're very strong right out of the box, but there are a few differences you need to consider before you select a 4L80. Now one of them has to do with gearing. First gear is somewhere around 248, I believe, when you compare it to the 4L60, which has a rating somewhere around 3. I think the 4L60s are about 315 or so. And basically what that means is when you're taking off from a light, the 4L60 will have a higher mechanical advantage. Not strength, but basically a better gear ratio to accelerate your truck. The other major difference in the 4L80 is the overdrive gear. It's not quite as low. Basically what that means is when you're cruising down the highway, your RPMs are going to be just a little bit higher. But those are both things that I'm willing to accept and live with because the strength trade-off is totally worth it. To bring the engine RPMs up a little bit quicker and help the truck accelerate off the line, I'm swapping to a converter that has a higher stall speed. Now the stock ones were rated, I think, somewhere between 16 and 1800 RPM, and this one is rated between 22 and 2400 RPM. It'll work really well with a stock engine, but the key is it'll work really great when I have an upgraded camshaft, different gears in the differential, and a whole lot more horsepower. I picked this one up from Recon, and it's rated, like I said, at 22 to 2400 RPMs, and it only costs about 200 bucks, so it's a great budget modification if you want to improve your truck's acceleration. Now, the very last thing that you need to change before you bolt up a 4L80 to any LS engine is you need a different flex plate, because the torque converter spacing is off by 0.400 inches between the 4L80 and the different style 4L60s. And I believe that has to do with when they made the switch from the small block Chevys to the LS. Well, the 4L80 is kind of a carryover from the older style engines. Now, basically, that difference needs to be made up somehow. And whenever you got a 4L80 behind an LS from the factory, this is what it would have: a flat flex plate and a 0.400 inch crankshaft spacer that has a new extended converter pilot. This is what centers the torque converter, and then obviously the pads, that's where the converter bolts up so the power gets transferred. So I need to swap out my stock flex plate for this one, which is another stock flex plate, and we'll be on our way. So, just a couple of housekeeping notes. If you have an oil leak, not saying you do, now would be a great time to take care of it. I unfortunately did not plan ahead, and I need to get this transmission in this weekend, so I'm going to put it back together for now. But this motor has high miles on it, and it will be coming out in the short future for a full overhaul, and when it does, then I'll reseal it. So I'm not too worried about the oil for now. I'll just have to keep an eye on the oil level and keep it topped off. Second thing to keep in mind if you're doing this style of conversion, a 4L80 behind an LS with a converter and a spacer. The stock bolts are fairly short, and the bolts that come with a flex plate for the little spacer, they have a small shoulder on them. You want to make sure you grab these bolts, because the stock ones, they're not going to engage fully. There's a chance they may back out. Now, you can get all these parts still from your dealership or through your favorite aftermarket supplier, but just make sure you get the right bolts. And finally, you want to use some sort of a thread locker on a bolt like this, because, well, anytime you tighten up a critical fastener in a place that's pretty much impossible to get to when the truck is together, well, you do not want these things backing out. So a little bit of thread locker on the right bolt will make all the difference. After struggling for a little bit laying on my back, I've finally got the engine and the transmission fully bolted up together. I even reclipped on the fuel line, the dipstick, and that little vent tube thing for the transmission, so it's all ready to go. Now, a little tip: anytime you're putting any automatic transmission together with any engine, you want to be careful that you don't jam the torque converter into the transmission. Now, this could happen because you've improperly installed the converter, and when you go to tighten the bolts, you could actually crack the pump if it's not lined in properly. So an easy way to tell if, well, things are right after the fact is just see if you can spin the converter easily by hand. If it spins, you know that it's been engaged into the pump properly, and you don't have anything to worry about. Now, there is one last thing that I want to get to today, and that's, well, basically a way to mount the transmission to the chassis with a crossmember. But the rear mount on the 4L80 does sit back quite a few inches further from where it did on the 4L60, so I need to modify the crossmember. From here, all I'm going to have to do is let this thing cool down just a little bit, hit it with some black spray paint, and then I can bolt it up underneath the truck. And that's all it takes to physically bolt a 4L80E into a truck where a 4L60E used to be. Now, of course, to make this thing run properly, there are a few more things I'm going to have to take care of, like some wiring, number one, and some tuning in the computer, but I'll get to that a little bit later on. Until next time, thank you guys for watching. I appreciate it a ton. Be sure to hit that subscribe button and click the like button if you enjoyed what you saw today. Until next time, I'm LT.